Fournier and Labelle in the Annual Report to the Commissioner, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, 1902, by Inspector W. H. Routledge. To volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The arrest, commitment, trial, conviction, and ultimate hanging of George O'Brien in August 1901 was thought to have been the culmination of crime in this country, but, as will be seen, the murders committed by O'Brien pale into insignificance when compared with the murders of Leon Boutilliette, Guy Boudoir, and Alphonse Constantin by Ed Labelle and Victor Fournier. To report this awful case, it will be necessary for me to commence at the very beginning, so that I may be able to bring out all the points. On July 16th, after a post-mortem examination and coroner's inquest on the body of a man found near Indian River, and the jury rendering a verdict that the deceased came to his death by bullet wounds at the hands of some person or persons unknown, another Yukon mystery sprang into existence. There was no mark of identification on the body of the murdered man, and the only tangible means which could possibly lead to a knowledge of his name was a small key ring containing 3 keys and a key ring tag marked Boutilliette E. Broughton, Boos, P.Q. This small but seemingly insignificant clue led to the knowledge that Leon Boutilliette had been murdered. Boutilliette was a French-Canadian, by trade a carpenter and contractor, and had lived at Saint-François, Beauce County, Province Quebec. A telegram to Theodore Poula of that place elicited the information that Boutilliette had left Beauce on June 4th, en route for the Yukon, that he had written a letter from Vancouver under date of June 11, stating that he was leaving for Dawson that date with 2 French Canadians named Constantin and Guy Boudoir. The party arrived at Whitehorse on or about June 15, and left for Dawson in a small double-ender boat on the 16th. This party was increased at Whitehorse by the addition of 2 men, whose names were given as La Dossier and La Forest, but who in reality were Labelle and Fournier. They were seen at several points along the river, but all trace of them was lost in the vicinity of Stewart River. The boat used by this party was numbered by the police at Whitehorse, 3744. Boats 3743, 3745, and 3746 arrived in Dawson from Whitehorse in good time, but boat 3744 was not found for some time. Finally, it was discovered in Klondike City by Constable Egan and brought to barracks. By this time, we had very fair descriptions of the companions of Boutilliette, but on July 31 matters became even more complicated by the receipt of a telegram from Constable Graham of the Ogilvie detachment, to the effect that the body of a man had been found by one Forrest on a sweeper 7 miles above Ogilvie. Constable Graham was at once instructed to have the body taken to Ogilvie, and Inspector Jarvis and Assistant Surgeon Mador were ordered there from Selkirk. After an examination of the body by Dr. Mador, Inspector Jarvis sent full details by telegram and stated that the head looked as though it had been blown off by a shotgun. Inspector Jarvis was then instructed to proceed to Dawson with the body and all possible evidence. On their arrival, a post-mortem examination was held by Assistant Surgeons Thompson and Mador, and in giving his opinion after the post-mortem, Dr. Thompson stated as follows: "I am of the opinion, from the condition found, that the body was dead before being placed in the river, that the condition of the head would lead me to suppose that death was caused through the injuries received in this locality, but whether the result of external violence or gunshot, from the condition of the part, I am unable to say. The body has been dead for a month or 2. An inquest was immediately held, the jury returning the following verdict: that the deceased came to his death through violence, at the hands of some person or persons unknown. The description of this body agreed exactly with that of Guy Boudoir, and we were then practically certain that 2 of the men who had left Whitehorse on June 16 had been murdered. Our query now was, where are the other 3 companions? Search as we would, we could arrive at no tangible theory. We were unable at the time to obtain any evidence that would in any way throw light on the murders. Detective Falconer was sent to the 40-mile district. Corporal Piper was sent to the McQuestion district. The comptroller was communicated with and kept posted as to our movements and actions. We now sent Detective Welsh to Whitehorse, Skagway, Seattle, and Portland, and I must admit that in sending him to these places, we did so only as a last resort. We were at our wits' end as to what to do next. All the clues were exhausted and followed out to their end with the greatest possible care. In Skagway, Welsh found a passenger list showing the names of Boutilliette, Boudoir, and Constantin as coming in on the steamship Amur. During all this time, Constable Burns of the town station squad had been on the case. He was employed in civilian clothes around the various creeks and in Dawson, and in fact everywhere in this locality where French was spoken, and I have no hesitation whatever in saying that it was through Constable Burns's most efficient work that the capture of both Labelle and Fournier was made possible. Constable Burns, being able to speak French thoroughly, was thus enabled to obtain information we could never have obtained otherwise, and I would here like to mention that I strongly recommend that he be promoted in compensation for the magnificent work he did in this case and the efficient manner in which it was performed. The result of his investigation was that he obtained information to the effect that two men, named Fournier and Labelle, had gone to Whitehorse early in June under assumed names. These men were seen in Whitehorse by several people, and a man named Charles B. Mack informed us that he had been at Whitehorse for about a week and had made arrangements with Labelle to come down to Dawson with him in a small boat in company with one or two others, but that Labelle kept putting off the day of departure from time to time until the arrival of one of the trains from Skagway, when a party of Frenchmen arrived, and then Labelle informed Mac that they would leave on the following morning for Dawson. That would be on June 17. Mac stated that about 7 o'clock on that morning he went down to the river and learned that the party had left about 6 a.m., so he was compelled to come down in another boat. He stated that his party passed Labelle and his party, camped at this side of the Hootalinqua, and he later on positively identified Peter or Victor Fournier as a companion of Labelle while they were in Whitehorse. When taken into our storehouse, Mr. Mack also identified the boat, 3744. Constable Burns found Fournier in Dawson, and from August 8 until the 17th, we had one of our men watching his every movement. From the 17th to the 22nd, it was considered absolutely necessary for us to have two men following him, as Constable Burns had received information that he was about to attempt to leave the country. A Mr. Cleveland arrived from Whitehorse on August 21, and on the 22nd, in company with Constable Burns, went downtown to see if he, Cleveland, could recognize Fournier. They went into the Donovan Hotel on 3rd Avenue, and Cleveland immediately recognized Fournier as one of the men to whom he had sold the boat 3744, which boat he had previously seen at barracks and positively identified. Constable Burns at once arrested Fournier on suspicion of having murdered Boutilliette and Boudoir. This arrest was, of course, telegraphed to the comptroller and to Welsh in Seattle, and in reply Welsh telegraphed as follows: "Have men here that knew Labelle for 10 years, gave me 3 addresses in Chicago that would catch him, had been arrested there many times. His partner was killed there by detective 8 years ago. Peter Fournier was his partner also. I have telegraphed to police in Missoula, Butte, and Chicago to arrest him. Sent for picture. Joseph Phelps talked to him here 3 weeks ago. Was going east. Answer what to do." In reply to the above telegram, the following was sent: "Warrant here for arrest Labelle. Charge murder. Follow and arrest him, taking man who knows him. I have information here that he was in Butte City, Montana, about month ago. Joseph Chapleau, 29 East Mercury Street, Butte City, can tell you. Comptroller, Mounted Police, Ottawa, will give you every assistance, extradition. If you go Montana, see Thompson Mining and Investment Company, for brother of Sergeant Smith, who will assist you." At this time it was found necessary to send another man to assist Welsh, one who was personally acquainted with Labelle, so we sent Mr. P. A. Rook of Whitehorse, who had sold the latter several articles, including a rifle and some ammunition. We were now getting our information and evidence into something like workable shape. We had 2 men with whom Labelle had made arrangements, or had at least endeavored to make arrangements with, to come down river in a small boat. Mac, and an old man named Patrick Merriman. The latter had been waiting in Whitehorse for some time, and Labelle was continually asking him to come down with his party, Labelle's. Merriman told Labelle that he could not go down with him as he was waiting for money from Skagway, and when brought to barracks, he identified the boat 3744, making his identification more positive by informing us that he had rigged the steering gear on the boat for a left-handed man. Later, when taken into the guardroom, out of a party of 6 or 8 prisoners, he immediately recognized Fournier as the companion of Labelle at Whitehorse. By this time, September 1, we had the following statements and witnesses ready for the prosecution. Constable Curry from Whitehorse, who marked boat 3744 and took the names of the party. P.A. Rook of Whitehorse, who sold rifle, .45-90 ammunition, and provisions to Labelle. Alfred Horn, who traveled with Boutilliette from Montreal to Whitehorse, roomed with him at Vancouver in room number 26 at the Gold House, and saw him in a small boat on the evening of June 16, with 4 other men on the river below Whitehorse. Alexander Snyde, who traveled with Boutilliette and Horn from Montreal to Whitehorse, and saw Boutilliette in a boat with Fournier and Labelle a few miles below Whitehorse. Isaac Forbes, who also traveled with Horn, Snyde, and Boutilliette from Montreal to Whitehorse, and saw Boutilliette in a small boat with Labelle and Fournier below Whitehorse. Snyde and Forbes both recognized Fournier in the guardroom. Mrs. Carrie Nelson of Selkirk, who knew Labelle well, and stated that he and Fournier, with Constantin, Boudoir, and Boutilliette, had called at her house or hotel at Selkirk, known as the Savoy, and purchased some provisions and had a drink between 9 and 10 a.m. Sunday morning, June 22. She also saw Labelle at Dawson the following Sunday and had a conversation with him. Patrick Merriman, who saw Labelle and Fournier at Whitehorse, and intended coming to Dawson with them, but could not get his money from the railroad company in time. He identified both Labelle and Fournier. Edmund Prue, who met Labelle in Dawson after the murders and had a conversation with him, saw him with a $100 bill and a watch and chain answering the description of Constantin's watch. He further stated that Labelle had said to him that Fournier was a blood, and if he, Prue, saw anything good to let them know about it, and they would make some easy money. Fournier Duba, who knew Labelle well, and who had come into the country with him and Fournier, and had rented a cabin to them after the date the murders were supposed to have been committed. Dodson, the second-hand dealer, to whom Labelle sold the murdered men's blankets, 3 pairs, on June 30 for $8, and signed the name of Louis Chaton of Vancouver. Uncle Hoffman, who purchased Boutillette's watch from Fournier. Cyprien Sicot, who knew Labelle and Fournier well. They had left their blankets and baggage at his cabin on returning from Whitehorse after the murders, and also left the .45-90 rifle with him and took a .30-40 rifle when they, Labelle and Fournier, went down river. Daniel A. Johnston, who traveled with Boutilliette, Boudoir, and Constantin on the steamship Amur from Vancouver to Skagway, and saw Labelle's party tied up at a point in the 30-mile river, and also saw the boat 3744 tied up near the bluff at Klondike City, and identified it in the possession of the police. E. Lava, who knew Labelle and Fournier, and testified about changing the $100 bill for them, and also to certain conversations he had had with both men. About this time we received a telegram from Welsh, dated from Wadsworth, Nevada, stating that he had arrested Labelle and was leaving with him at once for Dawson. The telegram stated that Labelle had told him the murders were committed on an island opposite a high bluff, about 10 miles below Stewart River. On receipt of this telegram, Corporal Piper left at once for the supposed scene, and with the able assistance of Constable Woodill of the Stewart River Detachment, succeeded in locating the island, and later found the exact spot where the murders had been committed. They also found many incriminating articles, which were brought to Dawson and used as evidence. We then sent Mr. Goatsman, the Dawson photographer, to what is now called Murder Island, where he took photographs from every vantage point, which views were used as evidence in the trials. Welsh and Rook brought 2 constables with them from Whitehorse, and with their prisoner arrived in Dawson on September 12. On the way to Dawson, Labelle made a partial confession and threw all the blame of the murders on Fournier. The day after the arrival of prisoner Labelle, Fournier, hearing that Labelle had made a confession and seeing that the jig was up, made a full confession and threw all the blame of the murders on Labelle. I do not think that in all the annals of Canadian criminal history was ever such a cold-blooded and premeditated story of murders told as that told by Fournier. He told us how he and Labelle had gone to Whitehorse for the purpose of getting hold of some men with money, and then murdering them while en route to Dawson. How they had met these three unfortunate men. Until this time we had not been positive that Constantine had been murdered, and in fact his body has not yet been found. At Whitehorse, and how they had left for Dawson in the small boat, had camped with them, eaten with them, slept with them, and then, after camping for the night on the island below Stewart River, they had murdered them in cold blood. How they had rifled the bodies of everything of value and received from the three only the small sum of $140. How, after they had rifled the bodies, they had tied the hands and feet of the unfortunate men and weighted them with stones and then thrown them into the Yukon River. How they had tried to burn up all possible evidence of their awful crime. How they came to Dawson and later went down to the lower river country, and at Eagle City met another French-Canadian named Archie Gibault, who accompanied them further down the river where they murdered him, a few miles this side of Circle City, Alaska. Both Fournier and Labelle were committed for trial. Labelle's trial commenced on October 27. At 6:30 p.m. on the 31st, Mr. Justice Craig finished his charge to the jury. The jury was then allowed 1 hour for supper, and at 7:30 they again assembled in the court, and the judge immediately sent them to the jury room to consider their verdict. At 8:40 p.m. the jury returned to the courtroom, and the foreman, P.R. Ritchie, asked the judge to explain the law relative to convicting a prisoner on circumstantial evidence. His lordship read the law as laid down by Roscoe, and then Mr. Young, one of the jurymen, asked the judge to read a passage on the same subject that had been mentioned by Mr. Hagel, the counsel for the defense, which his lordship did, and fully explained the law regarding circumstantial evidence. The jury again retired, and at 10:30, just 3 hours after leaving the courtroom, they returned, and on being asked if they had agreed upon a verdict, the foreman replied, "We find the accused, Ed Labelle, guilty as charged." The Crown prosecutor then moved for sentence. Mr. Hagel asked permission of the court to withdraw from the court. His lordship asked Labelle if he had anything to say, and he replied no. His lordship's remarks were very brief, merely stating that he did not see how the jury could have arrived at any other verdict. He told Labelle that he would say nothing further about the case, as his own thoughts must be very bitter. He then sentenced him to be hanged on the 10th day of January, 1903. The trial of Peter, or Victor Fournier, commenced on November 4 and lasted only 1 day. Judge Craig finished his charge to the jury at 6:53 p.m. The jury retired at 6:55 p.m. and at 7 p.m. returned to the courtroom, and on being asked if they had agreed upon a verdict, the foreman, J.H. Davidson, replied, "We, the jury, find the prisoner Victor Fournier guilty of the crime with which he is charged." The Crown prosecutor then moved for sentence, and on his lordship asking Fournier if he had anything to say, he jumped up in the prisoner's box and replied, "I have this to say. That man Labelle, he killed 4 men and got all the money. He came back to Dawson and then went out to California and had 1 grand promenade, and then came back here and got arrested, and now he is getting me hanged. That is all I want to say, and I thank you for what you have given me. I am bound to take my medicine, and I have always been a good little man, and I'm going to die with it." His lordship then sentenced Fournier to be hanged on the 20th day of January, 1903, and on sentence being passed, Fournier replied, "That ain't too much. That's all right." Both of these verdicts were universally popular with the community at large, and I have never heard a word from anyone that there might be, in any way, a possible doubt as to the guilt of both men. A great deal of credit is due to Sergeant Smith, Corporal Piper, Constables Burns and Bourke and Detective Welsh for the indefatigable manner in which they worked up these two cases. But as I mentioned before, both arrests and convictions were only made possible by the magnificent manner in which Constable Burns worked on the cases day and night. And I would once more strongly recommend that he receive promotion. As for Constable Bourke, it was entirely through his good work that we found Archie Gibault had been murdered near Circle City, and he certainly deserves great credit for the manner in which he performed his task. Detective Welsh performed about as pretty detective work as could be found anywhere in his tracking Labelle to Wadsworth, Nevada, and when it is considered that he traveled and searched through some 6 different states, it will be seen that he performed a gigantic work and made success out of what at one time seemed inevitable failure. Welsh would probably never have found Labelle had not Constable Burns obtained evidence from Frenchmen in Dawson and on the creeks as to his probable whereabouts, which information was at once telegraphed to the detective. We are all very much pleased as to the outcome of this awful murder case, as it can easily be seen that practically all of the work was very ably performed by our own men, independent of the detectives. End of Fournier and Labelle by Inspector W. H. Routledge. Read by Phil Schempf.